Hello, Internet. Welcome to another episode of the Get Geek podcast, social distancing edition. We are coming to you live from our respective fallout shelters. I am at my girlfriend's house. Waltz is holed up with Eli and AJ, and Wolfie is holed up on his own. But yeah. Welcome to our social distancing edition podcast. We hope you guys are being responsible out there. Introductions, of course, are in order. As you guys know, I'm Jose.
This is Wolfie.
This is AJ here.
Elias. What's up to Beauty Pie?
And this is Walt, and I hope everybody's out there safe and sound.
Indeed. I hope so as well. And it's great to join you guys. We're doing this remotely, as we mentioned before, but we're still going to bring you some awesome content that you guys will enjoy this week. Let's start it off first. Wolfie, why don't you tell us a little bit about our first mini discussion?
Well, actually, the podcast today is going to be two things. We are primarily going to be discussing Red Sun, the comic, not the movie. We recently reviewed the movie and talked about it, and this time we're doing our comic book read along. But before we get there, we're going to be talking a little bit about a fan submission comic book called Axeman. And Axeman, it's funny how we kind of came into possession of Axeman. One of our fans out there asked us to give our honest impressions on the book in hopes of helping him get started with his new storyline and everything. And Andre's going to give us the impressions himself. So, Andre, why don't you go ahead and give us the impressions on the first two issues of Axeman and what you thought about everything, artwork and storyline so far and all that.
All right. So, well, first I'd like to start by shouting out the guy who sent us this, his Twitter. That'd be at Mr. Ryan Comics. So it's written by Ryan Little, the guy mentioned in the Twitter. The art's by Brianne Andon, colors by Yuri Pinzone, the letters by Nikki Powers, edited by Cody Coulomb, I'm guessing, and the cover colors by Walter Pereira,
probably.
Yeah. Sorry for butchering your names, guys.
Yeah, we apologize.
And finally, the logo's by Chris Sheehan. The actual story itself. So, it features this group called Axemen. And their basic premise is that in a world where human populations basically spun out of control due to advances in technology and medicine, something else spun out of control. And that would be diseases, viruses, epidemics, pandemics, you name it. The purpose of the Axemen is to basically target patient zeros before their respective illnesses break out into the larger population.
So it's interesting that the topic is very current to what's going on nowadays.
Right.
You know, thankfully,
yeah. Where were they? Where were the Axemen of November, man? No, I'm kidding.
I was just about to say that. To me, it's a pretty interesting premise, and like I said, it's very current. Unfortunately, one of the things that I liked about the comic is I'm kind of a fan of the art style. Art style is pretty gritty. It does set a tone for the comic book pretty well.
Yeah, I haven't read the entire run, the two issues that we were sent yet, but I have read a little bit of the first issue, and so far, like, the art style gives me like and I hope this is not an insult to the artist in any way, but it is like a sort of a really interesting, like, Adult Swim, like, mixed with a slightly grittier. There was an art style in one of the Animatrix clips that this reminds you of. I don't know if you think it's the one.
That's a good
one that it reminds me of.
Exactly what you're talking about. I know
Yeah,
exactly what you're talking about.
yeah. So it kind of reminded me of one of the Animatrix short films from that little anthology that came out a few years ago, around the time of the second Matrix film, I think.
Hmm.
But the art is really cool. The premise is interesting thus far. I like the layouts on the page. Like, there's something to be said about pages that tell a lot with very few panels, so it's not too much of a mess on the panel. So I think the art style is really cool, and it flows really well. And so far, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. I rather enjoy the art style too. I guess one thing that I feel would have I don't know if maybe it's just because they gave us like a test copy to review, but like I felt that a little more elaboration could have gone into, the beginning. Like you kind of just dropped in there without any, like there was some context, but I felt like there could be a little more.
Yeah.
There could have been a little bit more exposition, kind of narration in the first early panels or early pages to kind of give you a little bit of a. It's one thing to like drop the character right into the action of a story right away, but typically that's accompanied by some more exposition, which again, it's not like a deal breaker or anything like that as long as the story is good and the action is good and the art is
Oh
well
yeah.
done.
Um,
But yeah, a little bit extra exposition would have gone a long way, I think, especially in that very first issue.
I actually think it was interesting. Again, not to go back to the Matrix, maybe this was an influence on Axeman. Probably not. I don't see necessarily an influence from the Matrix. Um, but it reminds me kind of, in a way, how the first Matrix movie starts. You get a very small monologue, and then you're dropped right into the cops just busting down the door on Trinity, and some crazy stuff happens, and then like from there it starts to unfold. So I don't really see it as even a little bit of a negative. I see it as a positive, but that's
Okay.
just me.
I mean, I don't think it's a negative either. Like I said, it's a kind of just
Mm.
like I said, it's not a deal breaker. It's just one of those things where like it wouldn't hurt, but at the same time, not absolutely necessary either.
I'd love to see where it goes.
Well, actually, I kind of liked how they did the beginning because normally, well, this is what I'm expecting from the author. When you jump right in, usually there's a bit. I think somebody said this. I think it was probably Wolfie, but there's exposition after as the
Hmm.
yeah. So basically, the first two issues should like have like suspense. It's kind of like the Mandalorian, and also I really really like the art style. Um, it
Yeah.
really got me nostalgic, especially
Oh,
to this old show called Samurai Jack, and
I was
I
gonna mention Samurai Jack.
And isn't it funny? The main character, the Axeman, doesn't he have like a samurai type looking face
yeah run
to his thing?
A little bit,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah
just a little bit. So it's interesting that Eli, points out the comparison to Samurai Jack.
You mean like a samurai mask kind of thing, I guess?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah, I see that too. I see that too. And again, that's probably where the Adult Swim kind of thing came out for me in a
Yeah,
sense.
actually, yeah. When you had said Adult Swim, the first thing that I thought was Samurai Jack, and I was gonna mention it,
Hmm.
especially when we were talking about kind of like the simplistic color panels and choices and stuff, which Samurai Jack kind of does, right? Like it's just
Hmm.
like a couple objects in the scene, not a lot of stuff going on in the scene, so that like your attention is brought directly to the characters and their interaction itself.
Yeah, I love the
Mhm.
focus that it gives you
Yeah,
on what's going on. I agree. Hmm.
Yep. So this is a comic that's on Kickstarter. The first two issues are on Kickstarter, I believe. Right? Right, AJ?
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm.
The second one was released March 11th.
Okay. So
nice.
I guess what we're saying is that this is an interesting comic to go check out if you're into that stuff. Um, it's
Which we assume
definitely,
you are,
yeah,
because you're
you
listening to
know,
us as well. And you're geeks. Um,
exactly.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Walt.
Yeah, it's a different type of comic book, and it has its merits. And I'm gonna I'm just gonna go back really quickly to what AJ said. I'm also of the kind of the ilk that I like the fact that they drop you right in,
Yeah.
and I'm hoping that as the story progresses, you get a little bit more of the world fleshed out and some more world building going forward. I think they started to do that in the second issue
Yeah.
A
because
little
the
bit. It
first
looks
issue
like it.
was a lot less action and a little bit more story driven. So I think that's where this thing is going to go. So we have to wait until the third issue to see what happens.
Yeah. For the author, keep going. I could definitely see this
Yeah.
blowing up as like a, yeah. It's a great start. I could
Could
really see.
be. Yeah. It could totally reach a lot of people and become a great mainstream success. I can see that because it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And thank you for sending it to us. Thank you for thinking of us, and thank you for asking for our opinion on this. We really appreciate that.
Yep, we'll put
Guys,
up the link to the Kickstarter on our episode notes, and we'll also
Yes.
put it on our Instagram just for anybody who wants to check it out.
and also just if you guys know of any artists that want to have like their art kind of reviewed or our impressions on their art or just kind of give a shout out on our IG and elsewhere, please send in submit anything that you guys want us to check out, and we'll give you guys, your credit and our impressions and everything. We'll give you our absolute honest impressions on all that. So beware, but at the same time, any and all submissions are welcome. So this was a really cool little fun thing that we got to do, and I think we're all like excited to do more of this. So
Yeah.
please give us more.
I
Yeah,
agree.
and just so you guys know, the email address is getgeeknews at gmail.com. So if you want to send anything, that's where you can reach us, and we'll take a look at it.
All right, so now onto our main subject, which is going to be Superman Red Sun, by Mark Millar, Dave Johnson, and Killian Plunkett. It's a I'm not the DC guy at the table. I think that would be Andre and maybe everyone else over here. I'm probably like the lowest person on totem pole of DC comics. But I have to say that I did enjoy reading this, especially after watching the movie. So again, if you guys have not read the comic and intend on reading the comic, please pause, read the comic, and come back. Um, or if you want to see the movie and you're listening to this podcast and you don't want the movie to get spoiled, pause again, watch it, come back, all that good stuff, because we're about to get into spoilers.
Yes.
So
Yes.
once again,
Um,
spoilers and spoilers and spoilers. Be ready
yeah.
and beware.
And just for some context for anybody out there who hasn't listened to either one of these and might want to come back to our episodes and maybe want to listen to these in the order that they were released in the real world, the Superman Red Sun comic book was released in 2003. And of course, the movie, which we just recently reviewed on our last episode, was just released in 2020.
All right, so um, The I kind of want to, because we just did the movie review, right off of the bat, before we get into fleshing out the story of the comic book and discussing everything in the comic itself, want to kind of get through the comparisons between the movie and the comic right away. There's a few very very key things that are different from the movie and the book. Some that are pretty surprising, and just kind of wanted to annotate that a little bit. And one of the biggest things for me was that the comic book comes like it's being narrated by Superman himself, and the movie was not so much a narration of Superman
Mhm.
as opposed to kind of like just viewing a life of Superman kind of thing. So how did you guys feel about that specifically? Because for me, one of the key differences between the comic and the movie is that the movie made Superman seem very childish, whereas the comic did not. The
Ye-
comic, because it was being narrated by Superman with his kind of inner dialogue being exposed, you see a Superman that isn't like, for lack of a better word, uneducated or naive. He doesn't seem naive, too naive in the comic book at least. He seems more of a still trying to figure out like his place in the world, but not naive to everyone's intentions. Whereas in the movie, he was naive to Stalin, he was naive to Brainiac, he was naive to everything around him.
Yes, yeah. So for me, I have just kind of the same viewpoint, but I agree that because of the fact that you had the narration, you could see some of the inner machinations inside of Superman's head, and it made it more like like a few incarnations of his origin story, both in the comics and in the movies,
Right,
where he narrates to let you know like about how he feels about being different from everyone in society, but of course this time it's from the perspective of being a Russian instead of an American.
right.
And also, yeah, Superman is still highly intelligent. He's a genius by an average human's standards. So even if he's not as intelligent as some of the other characters, like Lex Luthor and Brainiac, he's still much more intelligent than the average human being.
See, but
Um,
I felt like the movie didn't do a good job of showing us that.
Yes, that's what I agree with. It definitely,
Yeah,
the movie
yeah,
didn't
yeah,
show that.
yeah.
The movie showed him as childlike and naive,
Yes,
like you said,
yeah.
100%. The comic book definitely gave you some reasons behind his actions, and also some of the conversations he had with some of the characters in the comic as opposed to in the movie give you that sense as well. It's not just his inner monologue that gives you that idea that he's
Yeah.
not just naive and childish in the comic.
Well, you know,
Andre. Oh yeah. Go on. Sorry.
that's all right. Well, there's another. I wish I could get into this layer, but I'll get into it at the end. But
Hmm.
I guess maybe part of the reason why he's portrayed as much more of an intellectual. Well, not that he wasn't an intellectual in the movie, but like he was obviously, like you said, smart by human standards, definitely. Maybe not on the level of Lex Luthor and Brainiac, but yeah, I think that that kind of has it's kind of looped into the end, but I can't really talk about the end yet. So
Hmm.
yeah, we're gonna leave
Right,
that
I
at.
understand that. We're gonna get to the end at the actual end. It's one thing that we don't want to spoil too early on, because the ending is, for the
Yeah.
most part, it's less of an ending. The endings aren't necessarily different. It's just that there's an essentially an epilogue in the comic book that gives us a little bit more background to the entire story. So we'll
Yeah.
get there.
Hmm.
Something else.
Um,
Oh,
yeah.
something else. Because you asked about how the narration kind of changed the story. One of the ways in which I found it to like, in terms of the storytelling, is like in the comic. Eventually he becomes the premier of the Soviet state. So in the narration itself, it kind of gave me like that authoritative kind of vibe. Like
Mhm.
it was that extra layering of this is the story.
Yes,
Right.
yes. And a quick point on that, something that I liked about that in the comic is that you saw his mind slowly change from somebody who had no interest at all in being a leader, in imposing his will on anyone, towards near the end where he convinces himself that he needs to do that for the betterment of not only himself but of the entire world.
Right. So that's actually, and I want to get to that point. We'll get to that point in a little bit, but when we get into the actual story, but that is, just to kind of touch on that a little bit. It's very, very interesting where, like, in the movie, the motivations for him being a leader are very different from, like, maybe not very different, but like in the movie, his motivations for taking over power come from like a vain personal kind of thing, um, which I think is exemplified in how he came into power in the movie versus in the book. It's more of a self-realization that he's been put on this earth or in this world to do what no one else can. So like I felt
Hmm.
like the motivations were a little bit different.
Hmm.
One being a little bit more selfish than the other. The other thing that was very different from the comic and the movie is a very specific character that you touched on when we did the movie. Jose,
Hmm.
is Piotr. the
Yes.
illegitimate child of Stalin. Which, when I didn't read the comic when I saw the movie, so
Hmm.
I had no idea about this character. So when you mentioned it to me, I was like, wow, okay. But I didn't realize how crucial and how big of a part of the story he actually is. Um, and he's a
Yes.
huge, huge part of the story, which kind of makes me like wonder why on earth. I mean, obviously they took him out of the movie to do essentially a retelling of this retelling. Um, but that was kind of a little bit of a shock to me after reading everything that like how involved Piotr was,
Hmm.
such as you know uh, certain aspects of the story as well as the the origin story of Batman in the comic versus the origin story of Batman in the movie and
Hmm.
stuff like that. Like those very very personal or rather huge implications that involve Piotr. So
Yes. I
Uh,
I agree because I thought he was a really, really interesting, as you already described. He's a pivotal, a very interesting character in the comic,
right,
and he changes the dynamic of it a great deal. Including, again, he changes Superman's motivations because of his own motivations, and like it to me, it's kind of a shame that he was removed in the movie because I get that sometimes with the animated versions of these things, they want to tell a slightly different story just to have something new to look forward to. But I think you put in like another 10 minutes on the movie, not even, maybe like 6, 7 minutes with Piotr as a character still featured in it, and you
yeah,
can change it in a way that would make it, I think, more interesting in the way that the comic is.
well, I
yeah,
think one of the reasons that they did that is because they wanted to feature Lana a little bit more and give him more of a backstory.
Hmm.
Because if you look at the way the comic is formatted, you don't know too much about um, Superman. They don't even mention him as being Kal-El. Well, they do. Well, we'll get into that. But
Yes. Hmm.
he doesn't get very much of a backstory. You know, you're basically just dropped in there where it says, okay, he didn't go to Kansas, he went to Russia, and then now all of a sudden, you know, the United States knows of a Superman, right?
right.
Whereas in the film, they gave him a little bit more, you know, of a backstory, which actually does pay off in the film in a big way, you know.
Right. Hmm.
So they may have taken that character and they said, you know what, we're telling a different story. I think in the film itself, you have a more of an emotional type of Superman than you do in the comic. And I think to do that, they had to give him this backstory with Lana to pay it off a little bit later.
Maybe, but see, I kind of disagree a little bit there, simply because like there is emotion attached to Superman in the comic book. In another thing that they changed between the movie and the comic book, which is his relationship with Wonder Woman, with Diana, which
Hmm.
it's kind of a little bit of a big deal if you guys haven't seen the movie. Once again,
Mhm.
spoilers, but in the movie, Wonder Woman is a lesbian, and that's kind of where the romance completely ends. You know, like Superman is trying his hand at like a romantic relationship with Diana, and
Hmm.
she shuts him down and lets him know like, "Hey, I'm lesbo." But in the comic, it's not like that, and the comic makes that whole relationship a lot stronger, where you see Superman trying to, you know, convince Diana from a romantic standpoint to be on his side, and even at some points, maybe not even realizing that Diana is doing things for him from a romantic point of view, and he only realizes it later on when he says things. There's a panel where he realizes, maybe I was so foolish. How blind could I have been? You know, that's kind of like his own like moment of, I guess, vulnerability, realizing how bad, like how he messed up, not seeing a true love right in front of him and stuff like that.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of like, I don't want to go too much more on a lot of the changes because I don't want to make this a full comparison of the film and the book. But those are kind of like the major things, with the exception of the ending, like we mentioned, that we'll get to. Those are some of the major things that were different from the comic and the movie. Would you guys all agree? Anything else that you guys want to bring up as far as stark differences from the film and the book?
I think the
Yes.
villains
Uh,
that were in there. right?
Yeah.
And I think AJ wants to really
Oh,
that.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
I have a list. So we already mentioned a few of these, but one thing that kind of irked me was, where's the Fortress of Solitude, bro?
Yep.
Yeah,
Where,
he
where,
didn't
where?
have one.
In the
Yeah.
comics, there was.
Yeah, in the comic, Brainiac started building that, and they called it a different thing. It was a winter something or other, right?
His winter residence, but one of the characters also called it the Fortress of Solitude in passing.
Right.
I mean, I think that like it's
And
there,
he,
but it's not like it didn't feature a prominent role, so I don't think that that's too big of a missive. But yeah, if you're a Superman fan, you want to see the Fortress of Solitude.
Well, I think the thing that's important though, and maybe this is what Eli is going to get at, and what AJ was also getting at, is if it's not a huge deal, but like it is a treasure trove of Easter eggs in the comic, which
oh
I think
yeah,
Right?
is what
Yes.
makes it so
Yes.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yes.
like for
Right.
goodness,
So like, yeah. Mhm.
there was a statue of Darkseid in there, and it's like, okay, what does this mean? Is that Darkseid stuffed? Is that something taken from Apocalypse? What the hell?
Yeah. Like,
And
what
the
did he
place is actually
do?
called the Winter's Palace in Siberia. So
Okay. Okay.
The other
Kind of
thing,
makes sense.
the other thing I found that I think would have been so awesome. I don't know why they didn't do it in the comics, because he knows Superman is Lex Luthor knows Superman is patrolling the globe 24/7. He has his net of information out.
mm,
So one of the things that he does to counteract that is when he's working on the Green Lantern ring and the Green Lantern Corps, he's not even doing it on Earth. This dude is doing it in the Phantom Zone.
Hmm.
Yeah.
that is a good
Yeah.
point.
Which is really cool. I mean, yeah, Luther is also again probably I say he's a pretty big difference for me because in the movie he's portrayed not entirely as a hero, but as somebody who is in the comic. Let's put it this way: in the comic, he's a bit more of like a complete jerk, not only
Oh,
to
He
everyone
he,
around
he
him,
is.
but to Lois. He
Mm-hmm.
never sees her in the comic, and like he's
Absolutely.
much more obsessed with Superman in the comic, even though he's also obsessed with him in the movie. And a big difference in how he's portrayed is that you see more of his genius, I think, in the comic also, and he's less again he because he's so crass and he's so terrible to everyone around him in the comic. He's portrayed as a little bit more of an anti-hero in comparison to the movie, in my opinion.
Right. One thing is there is a scene where you see Lex Luthor in the comic, I guess out of frustration and anger that he lost a chess game, kill I guess some of the scientists like with a gun, which you don't see him
Yeah.
do anything like that in the movie. The worst thing that happens in the movie is that he lets the the fake Superman or Superman 2, the US version of Superman, kind of die a terrible death, but he doesn't look at it as a human being. But that's
Right.
the worst thing that happens in the film. In the book, like you kind of see a little bit more of that classic Lex Luthor villain. So that's one
Oh,
thing.
and
You know,
Wolfie, did you see what we meant when remember when we saw the movie together? We said that the U.S. Superman was basically Bizarro in the comic. You see what we mean a little bit more from the panels in the comic, I would say.
right?
At,
Leo, you're
around,
right. Yeah, actually, you're very right. You're very
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
In the movie, it's not as clear, I think, but yeah, it
Oh
looks
no,
that way.
because the thing is that we see like we don't see so much of Bizarro as we see a some sort of clone that ends up devolving based on the powers. Like obviously it's kind of like a Bizarro look, but in the comic he's more of a Bizarro from the very get, not so much a perfect clone that ends up devolving.
And his demise is very different in the comic, also.
Very different, very very different actually.
Mhm.
Yeah, we'll get to that. So actually, with that, do you guys want to get right into the story then?
there's one more thing I want to mention,
Oh,
and then I'm going to pass it off to Eli.
sure.
So,
Please go ahead.
in the vein of Lex Luthor, Uh, again, the movie did him. He's differently portrayed in the movie, but God, I just there's in when Superman goes to invade, the White House, because he's being pushed by Brainiac. The unfolding of events there, that was also, again, and I get you want to tell the story differently, but man, the comic just really, really like Lex Luthor is a toss like a badass. So in the movie, they present Stalingrad to him, right, to kind of get him to snap out of it. In
Hmm.
the comic, he just writes the dude a letter, and he basically just shuts him down with like 11 or so words. God, that is just damn.
I mean, yeah, like there's a little bit of a stark contrast in how exactly their interactions go. In the comic book, there's a lot more interactions between Lex Luthor and the Red Sun, so to speak. I felt, and it was more of a almost like a more personal rivalry between the two of them versus a diplomatic rivalry. I felt.
Mhm.
Actually,
Yeah. Mhm.
there's something that I wanted to point out. In one of the scenes, I think it was after they fight the Lantern Corps. Well,
Yeah.
Hal Jordan and all, and Wonder Woman. They send in a group of villains, but one thing that I really want to point out
Yeah.
is one of the people in that group. One of the persons in that group. Yeah, it's Doomsday.
Yeah.
And that really surprised me. That caught me off guard because I wasn't expecting that, especially from this comic. But
Yeah. He
Like,
came out of nowhere and he didn't really do anything. He just like was there just to see him.
there was a
yeah,
complete absence of his rogues gallery in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true.
yeah.
So,
Um.
all right. So why don't we get into the comic proper? I think we spent a decent amount of time with the comparison.
Right. So, again, so the comic starts off right into President Eisenhower, right? Ike addressed the country, letting everyone know that the Russians have unveiled this new super weapon with all his powers, and it's Superman himself. So we kind of skip the origin of Superman and everything, and we go into this um, more adult, Superman that we didn't get in the movie. We From there we get essentially the president trying to contact Lex Luthor, who happens to be playing four chess games while reading Machiavelli's The Prince
Yeah.
in I think he's reading it in Italian, um, which is kind of crazy, while also learning another language at the same. Yeah, he's learning Urdu while reading The Prince and playing and checkmating four people at the same time,
Which
Oh
is
my
which
crazy.
god.
kind of very quickly, clearly tells you, hey guys, this is our version of Iron Man, Tony Stark. So,
Yeah.
um, yeah, the government is looking to Lex Luthor to try to find a solution to the Russian Superman problem. What did you guys think of Lex Luthor being this total badass? I mean, again, I'm not. I'm coming to you guys from the non DC super fan, so obviously I know the basics of like Lex Luthor and Superman and all the other DC comics. But has he ever really been portrayed to be this much of a genius
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
pretty
hundred
routine.
at
percent.
this level?
Yeah. He's the smartest human on Earth. He always has been. He's
Yeah.
by far in the
Oh,
DC
okay.
continuity. So because like you said, I mean, well, in the
But
Marvel universe,
smart from like a mad scientist point of view, or
yeah.
smart like here, like just like he's intellectually this freaking genius.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
think of it this way: like he did build that he builds that suit that he uses to fight Superman that's powered by kryptonite. That's one of
Yeah.
the things he built. That wasn't something that he paid for, like say Batman would. Batman is kind of a techie, but also he outsources a lot of stuff. He's more like you said on Iron Man's level. He builds pretty much everything that he uses to
Right,
face Superman and like to deal with any problems that he has.
And I think
right,
Lex has evolved over the years because there was a couple of times where he's been like that mad scientist, but then
Yeah.
he's lately especially they portray him more like that upper level intellect. And I got a chuckle of watching him playing the four chess games,
Mhm.
learning a language and all that stuff, because it almost seems like throughout the comic they try to up the ante with that as they go along.
And another quick point is what's interesting about that is that it portrays him much more as the other side of the coin in terms of being the rival of Superman because they're both completely detached from humanity in a way. Superman because he's an alien, and Lex Luthor because his intellect and his level of thinking is so much higher than every other human being on Earth. I mean, the president calls him for advice, so he's
yeah.
just attached in
Yeah,
a
well, I
way
don't know.
that
I don't know if
Superman
we can say that like Superman is detached from humanity because he's rooted in humanity. The reason that he's so idealistic is because of obviously the love that he has for the ideals that he was born and raised with before he knew that he was Superman. Remember, until he was 12 years old, he mentions he was just like one of the regular people going through the same problems that they were going through, and the reason he does everything is for what he believes the betterment of humanity. So I don't know if he's detached from I think he becomes
is.
detached. I
It's
think
almost
when he rises to power, that's when he
yeah.
becomes detached.
I agree with that. I agree with that
Yeah.
because at that level he's so high up in the ivory tower, so to speak, that he can't be. He's making decisions for almost the entire Earth. You know.
Well, no, yeah, because I mean, we'll get to that point, but yeah, he at one point ends up being the master of the entire world minus two countries.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, so anyway, we get from there. Lex figures out a harebrained scheme of being able to solve the Superman problem, and he contacts the president directly, like he's his buddy, and for he asks permission to down a satellite, a Russian satellite in a heavily populated town, and he needs 100 technicians and $10 million stat. You know, and that leads to Superman having to save the satellite from crashing down on Metropolis. And he has a bunch of different ways. He states that he has so many different ways of stopping it. He could freeze it. He could maybe veer it off course and whatnot. But he chooses to try to do it in the most spectacular fashion, so that everyone is there to see. And what this does is um, it gives Lex Luthor the ability to find the satellite and use the DNA from Superman's body or grips and whatnot to try to, solve the problem, as we'll see in a few. But the other thing that was kind of cool in this comic that wasn't in the movie is that there's a moment that when he tries to save Metropolis, he accidentally almost breaks off the giant globe at the top of the Daily Planet Tower. And he uses this opportunity to show the world that his most important care in the world is to save humanity, no matter where no matter who it is. And I think that this like kind of is very telling as far as like the humanity and the person that Superman himself is, at least before he rises to complete and total power.
Right.
Um,
He comes from a
he's doing it for
similar
the children.
background, like as the American Superman. He still comes from a small family. He was raised on a farm, so that's still similar enough that it takes some changes in the story to change him away from that.
Right, exactly. And he even says it right here. I'm just going to read off to you page 19, where he's
Hmm.
saving the people from the bottom of the Daily Planet from the globe hitting them. A cluster of support cables groaned and snapped. People below screamed for someone to save them. Not my people, but I never refused a cry for help. All the lies they spread about me, the propaganda they engineered at the height of the Cold War, none of it mattered for a while on that bright afternoon. Just for a single moment, they realized I was here to save them. And
Mhm.
that kind of that still bemoans the underlying truth about what Superman represents. Am I wrong, AJ?
Well, I actually beg to differ just a little bit because we also
Okay.
get a little more of an insight into his mind just a few panels later. So he does. This is kind of. I don't know if this is kind of like a cockiness thing or kind of like a foreshadowing to come, but like when
Okay.
he's actually saving them from the satellite collision, there's a couple of panels where he goes, "Well, there are a couple different ways to do this. I could have just used my heat beams and just completely obliterated this thing out of the sky. No casualties done. I could have targeted it at this point. It would have been decommissioned as well." But basically, what he does is he chooses the flashiest, most rash, and endangering way possible to show these people just how strong he is.
Well, yes,
So,
yes.
with
Like
this,
just like I had explained before, he does that to kind of like be as spectacular in the face of these Americans and show his might and strength and all that.
yeah,
But like I said, like he's still at the end of the day, his goal is still to save people, no matter who or where they are. So like there's still light. There's still not light. There's still like glimpses of the Superman that we know and love. Well, the
Yeah,
Superman that you DC guys know and love.
he's mostly
but
the same Superman, but yeah,
Yeah,
there is
absolutely.
even in the panel where he's saving these people, you see a little bit of like a an intimidating look in his eyes. So it's not entirely like there's like a smugness to him. So yeah, there's a hint of that, but he's mostly the
Yeah,
same Superman. I agree.
yeah, yeah,
yeah. But to me, though,
absolutely.
that kind of set the tone for me. Like that
Hmm.
I completely understand where you guys are coming from, but for
Hmm.
me, that's that is not exactly the Superman I know. The Superman I know would have gone for the safest route.
Unless you're
Yeah.
talking about the Man of Steel Superman.
Yes. Okay.
Mm.
He
But
would just destroy everything. Yeah.
comic
Hmm.
wise, he is
Well,
generally safe boy, Boy Scout. This guy, he kind of, and it's like you guys said with the intellectual thing earlier. He really plans a, he doesn't plan several steps ahead, but you can see that he puts a lot of thought behind each and everything he does because he knows that not only is he saving people, he also understands that he's part of the Soviet political machine.
And I think that's a little bit of the reason why he chose to do it like that. Because what do we know about the Soviet Union at that time? They were really into propaganda. Propaganda for them was like the way that you showed the world how much greater the Soviet Union is, right? So for Superman, he was born into that culture. He was born into that mentality. So obviously, if he's going to do something, he's probably going to do something in the most flashiest way because you know what, propaganda wise, it makes sense. It's one
See,
of these things where it's like, you know what, this is gonna this is gonna put a lot of eyes on what I'm doing here. You know.
yeah, I agree that it's rooted in propaganda, but I see a slightly different path because obviously at this time in World War II, America was also really pushing a lot of propaganda. The difference here is that Superman is not only part of the propaganda, like in terms of him being the propaganda, him being the
Yeah,
weapon that they're
exactly.
kind of
Basically.
pushing, and the superiority that they're really pushing. But they're also
Hmm.
whispering into his ear how superior he is. They don't do that in the original Superman runs. He doesn't have like government backing, I guess. He doesn't have
right.
like a hype man like he does
Mhm.
here, which just happens to be Stalin in this case.
Yep.
So
So
it works. perfect in this iteration for him.
Mhm.
So there's one more thing that I want to touch on before we move on, and as he's saving the globe, he runs into Lois Luther, which in the movie it's Lois Lane. She definitely doesn't take anybody's last name in the movie, but
Yeah,
here
that's
Lois Luther, and he has a little bit of a moment where he glimpses, I guess a little bit. He hints a little bit at like a possible romantic kind of connection there. He can sense that her heartbeat's a little bit elevated. She has a little bit more perspiration. And he mentions that centuries later, after 1,000 interpretations of this meeting, a famous poet would write an alternate history of the world where Lois Luther and him and Superman became lovers. So it's interesting that they kind of, again, that he's narrating all this, and they never really touch upon this possible romantic situation again in the comic. I believe I may be wrong. I don't think they do, um, but it's funny that they have this interaction,
They don't.
right? So,
yeah. There's a hint of Lois being intrigued by Superman, but not really reciprocated by Superman in the comic.
yeah, talking a little bit more about Lois, I feel like Lois in the comic isn't as impactful as she normally is in the real Superman universe or in the movie itself. I felt like that's one thing that I think that the movie did a little bit better is showing Lois being Lois. In here, she just to me just seemed like a supportive housewife.
Yeah,
You
she's
know,
like a trophy wife for Lex.
yeah, which was
He'll
very, very
her out.
different for me to see because I've always seen Lois Lane as one of the most powerful women in comic books. Period.
What I
Hmm.
liked it a little bit because it was about her conflict with that. Her like internal. There was a lot about her internal conflict with being sort of a trophy wife instead of being her own fully fledged career woman in like she is in the comics usually. There's a
Yeah.
little bit of the conflict of that in the comic. Although you're probably right, she has more of an impact in the on the overall story in the
Right.
movie, which is the comic.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So we got a lot still to cover.
Hmm.
We are fast forwarding now to Superman having his day in his country of Mother Russia. There's Superman Day here, where he has his own parade, which he can't help but to miss parts of the parade because he has to intermittently go and save um, parts of the country that are in trouble. And here's where we get introduced to Piotr. Piotr here is kind of while Superman is gone saving the rest of the country, in the middle of his own parade, Piotr is kind of upset that in Stalin's mind, the person that's to succeed him is going to be Superman when Stalin is gone, and so on and so forth. And Piotr, being an illegitimate child of Stalin, feels like this is wrong because Superman, who knows if he's going to live for 1 million years and he's going to be the president of or ruler of the country for the next 1 million years, whereas Piotr wants that position for himself. Um, and it's really interesting to see this dynamic. When I first see this, it's again for me, Piotr is not too so far at this very moment. He doesn't seem too significant. He just seems kind of like a bratty child. But we'll see
Hmm.
later on that he's not just going to be a bratty child. Um, in this same kind of scene, we see that there's a gala also being gathered, which is also where um, Wonder Woman and Superman have their first dance and the romantic relationship between them. So, um, Eli, haven't heard from you. What did you think of Wonder Woman's romantic connection with Superman, at least at this point?
Well, I felt it was very different from the movie. Well, that's obvious because in the movie she was lesbian and they hinted at that, but there's nothing really much to it. Uh,
I mean,
yeah.
one thing that I can say is that, like, one thing that's very different from like the Wonder Woman that I feel like you see in everywhere else portrayed is that she's like kind of like a very smitten young princess. She's like, oh, how wonderful it is that there's this other person that's like me, and oh, mother, he's a really nice person, and this that, and the other, and kind of like not really independent Wonder Woman that I think that we're used to seeing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought
I
that was very different for me.
I didn't like that honestly because
I
and in the
personally
movie
didn't either. I
I
didn't
didn't like
either.
yeah and in the movie I didn't like it either because it was like why can't Wonder Woman just be a character in here that is consequential. And like in the comic, she's into Superman, and in the movie, it's like, oh, she's not into Superman, but that's only because she's a
It's
lesbian. Like it's like,
right,
no,
exactly. So it's like for me, this is really, really difficult. Like there's certain aspects of the comic I feel like that I liked more than the movie, but then at the same time, there's certain things in the movie that I like better than the comic. But it's just like in the comic, we have Wonder Woman into Superman, which is awesome, but she's not the Wonder Woman that we know and love, independent and everything. In the movie, she is the independent, strong Wonder Woman, but then she completely shuts down any chance of there even being an iota of imagination between relationship between her and Superman. So it's like, ah, I don't know. That's how I felt about it.
what
Yeah, I
is?
feel.
Sorry, go ahead, Eli.
Oh, I feel that, like you guys said, she was very dependent, and also like going to a few parts like later on in the story, I feel like she was like too dependent because like I don't want to get I don't okay. I'm just gonna never mind.
Well,
No,
the way
go
that
on, go ahead.
Well,
I
the
want to
way
hear you.
that
I'm gonna like spoil it.
Okay.
Yeah.
it's okay. Look,
All right.
the way that I felt about it on the flip side is that what I thought was interesting about her story, more so in the comics, and her story of Themyscira in general, is that it's involved more as like a political power in the comic. It's involved that way in the movie, but in the comic, it's a little there's a little bit more of the fleshing out of that backstory to everything, and you see Queen Hippolyta a little bit more in the comic. So that's pretty cool about Wonder Woman's role in this.
Right. So
Mm.
we go from there to a conversation that Stalin and Superman are having, and this is actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about that's very, very different from the film, and it's this interaction that he has with Stalin, where um, the interaction is kind of very in the comic book is kind of inconsequential. It's not. It's very innocent. Doesn't really have much to do about anything. It's just Superman asking Stalin, "Hey, where's Pyotr?" He's worried about him and this, that, and the other. And Stalin's like, who cares about Pyotr and this, that, and the other? And Superman leaves and goes to find Pyotr shooting a scarecrow. It seems like he's getting drunk or under the influence at least. He has a private conversation with him out in the field. Um, and this is a very, very important thing as far as the motivations for Superman in the comic taking over as a leader in the future versus how that whole thing happened in the movie. Um, in the comic, right here, Superman is trying to talk to Piotr, letting him know that like I don't care about being a leader or this, that, and the other. That stuff is not important to me. He just cares about being a good representative of their cause. Whereas Piotr is upset that he's not the one that's going to be um, taking over the party, and that ever since Superman came into town that Piotr has essentially been cast aside as a nobody, where even any of his like best achievements live in the shadow of Superman, and he proceeds to uh, point the gun towards his head to try to kill himself. But the
Mm.
reason that he tries to kill himself is a very, very important piece, which again we don't have in the film. The reason he tries to kill himself is because he has regret for killing for a flashback that we see here where he kills these two parents that happen to be the parents of a young Bruce Wayne, I guess, in this telling. And he kind of can't live with that anymore. But before as he pulls the trigger, we realize that Superman is quick enough to even intercept the bullet, and he gets pissed off that Superman stopped him from even killing himself, which I thought was kind of a little bit of a funny interaction. What did you guys think about like that whole scenario where Piotr is essentially we reveal Batman's essential origins, as well as the person who killed Bruce Wayne's parents in this telling, as well as you know him being upset at Superman for interrupting his suicide. What did you guys feel about this whole little section here?
What I like the most about this scene is that as he's talking to Piotr's still shooting the Scarecrow. And every time he messes up the Scarecrow, Superman goes to fix it. And then he'll shoot it
That's
again,
true.
and then he'll go back to fix it. And I like that small detail because it shows that no matter how dumb and insignificant it may be, Superman will do whatever it takes in his power to fix something. He is Mr. Fix It. And this is like
Keeping it in order
the
this way, which is
staple
interesting.
of that entire persona. And it really, this is another one of those things that for me set the tone going forward. And I really like that small.
Actually, you know what? You just pointed something out for me that makes a lot of sense, right? Because I think Piotr kind of represents society as a whole in a sense, right? If you think about it, every time he shoots down the Scarecrow and Superman goes to fix it, he's like, "Hey, I didn't ask you to fix it. Nobody told you to go fix it." But Superman just like ignores that and still keeps fixing it. Like he doesn't care. So this is the point where we can start seeing him being out of touch with society's and people's actual wants and desires versus what he wants to do for society or what he feels is the right thing to do. Um, hmm,
Yes,
interesting.
yeah, I agree. This is actually one of my favorite parts of the entire comic.
Yeah,
This
me too.
this dialogue, because it sets up Piotr and how interesting of a character he is. And again, it's a shame he's not in the movie, but it sets him up also not just as somebody who's jealous of Superman, but like it humanizes him, like you said, because he feels that guilt over killing over killing Batman, young Bruce Wayne's parents, and shooting young Bruce Wayne in the shoulder.
Right,
Um,
right.
and also, like, he feels the guilt over not only just because he feels it on a human level, because of all of the things he had to do to get as far as he did, to win as much of his father's favor as he did, and it's still nothing compared to the favor that Superman wins because of who he is. So that's a really cool dynamic at play here. And I think that it's great also, you're right, AJ, like I love the detail about how Superman is constantly, he stops him from killing himself, he picks up the Scarecrow's hat and like its head, and that's a really interesting detail also that I didn't even notice until you mentioned it, and it really does set the tone really well. Plus, I love Batman's origin in here way
Right.
more than I do in the movie.
Yeah. So very,
Uh,
very I like that too. I gotta admit that good catch, AJ. I didn't even really realize that until you mentioned it. I mean, I realized it as I was reading it, but I didn't realize how like kind of impactful that little interaction is with him fixing the scarecrow for him.
Hmm.
well, actually, uh, the I know this scene popped out to a lot of you guys, but like this really popped out to me, and you guys already stated it. But it's when it's the interaction between Piotr and Bruce Wayne, and it just it surprised me. It caught me off guard. I did not expect that, but
What part exactly caught you off guard?
well, just the whole entire like the scene, like the whole entire thing, and especially the art. The page after, I think it's the page after Bruce Wayne gets shot in the shoulder,
Hmm.
where it's
Right.
like, yeah, Bruce Wayne is just like screaming, and then there are bats like like on the side. It just really popped out of me. Popped out
Yeah,
to
it's
me.
a cool scene. It's for sure a cool scene, and that's also, I guess, like the moment that it's like the moment that like he, in his brain or his mind, became the Batman.
Yeah.
Um, so while he's talking to Piotr, he hears something. He doesn't understand exactly what's going on, but he hears some shouting coming from Moscow, and he, you know, gives up the conversation he was having with Piotr, and he rushes to Moscow, only to find that Stalin's been poisoned. And he realized that he's been poisoned with some acute cyanide. Not sure exactly where it came from and so on and so forth, but obviously it's an intentional poisoning, which actually I don't think they ever elaborate on who did the poisoning. Yeah,
Actually, they did.
they did. I don't remember where.
Piotr
Who
says
who
something
who?
about it.
Who?
Piotr says he's done a terrible thing, so it's very much suggested that he's the one that did it.
Oh, I thought that does make sense. I thought he was still talking about like the him killing the Waynes.
No, I think AJ was going to say the same thing because what he says specifically is, "I've done such a terrible thing, Superman. Father made me so angry this morning, and
Oh,
I arranged."
right.
And then he cuts off, and
Mm,
then you know
you are right. You are
they hear the
correct.
shouting for Stalin.
Correct. That's really interesting. Okay.
Hmm.
So Stalin's been poisoned by his son apparently, and that also apparently happens to like go right over Superman's head. Because we don't see any repercussions about from that in the future, I believe. But this is the thing that's very, very different from the film, and which kind of changes the motivations in the comic versus the film. In the film, Superman kills Stalin via death ray, not by accident or anything, premeditated first degree murder, and then takes control of the Soviet Union right then and there.
Hmm.
And here, Stalin is dead, and he, I guess, is upset about it himself and all that stuff. But he doesn't immediately take control of the country. Not yet. Everyone's been moaning him to take control of the country. Everyone, all the powers that be within the country are trying to make him the de facto leader. But he doesn't believe in taking control of the country. Whereas in the movie, he
Right.
grabbed that control, you know, through killing Stalin. So, which of the two killings? I wanted to talk about this specifically. Which of the two, I guess, deaths of Stalin were better for you from an overall aspect of in the story?
I preferred the poisoning better because, again,
Hmm.
I hate to harp on this, but Piotr makes the story so much more in depth, as opposed to
Hmm.
just. I mean, what they did in the movie was cool too, but it wasn't for me. It wasn't the same level of depth. Like even after Stalin dies, like you said, he's so reluctant to take the throne for
Right.
yeah, and just those kinds of elaborations you don't get that in the movie.
No, definitely
No.
not.
That's why I was saying that in the comic, I still feel like he's a little bit more truer to Superman form than in the movie because he's still like about just cause versus grabbing power at all cost, which I felt like the movie was more about like Superman wanting more and more power. um so yeah, I mean, and then we also get introduced to Lex Luthor's version of Superman, which is a bizarro like Superman being, which he sends directly right away to fight Superman, not in the way that it was done in the film, but either way, they still fight it off. He is not as strong as Superman. Um, and can who wants to explain to me exactly how this whole London thing happened? Because this wasn't really part of the film either. I had a little bit of trouble understanding. Like I see that a bunch of people died in London because of their battle and so on and so forth. Um, where they didn't put this in the movie at all, right?
Yeah, so I think what this part was really trying to allude to was that even though the United States produced this horribly twisted aberration that was basically sculpted from Superman's image, at the heart of it, he really was Superman because he did the right thing. Even though they leave it kind of ambiguous, you can pretty much because what is one of the things he does before? Because all right, before I even get there, when they're fighting, right? Uh, what's his? Bizarro tries to use X-ray for some reason, right? What he ends up doing is he ends up severely irradiating these these U.S. submariners that are also spectating this event. And what ends up happening is that one of these guys, obviously being driven crazy by radiation, they press one of the
The nuke buttons, right?
nukes in
Hmm.
their possession. And one of the things that Bizarro does is that, because he sees the nuke is about to hit them, he doesn't continue his fight with Superman like some mindless beast. He purposely freezes Superman and then goes after it himself. Now, Superman's going over this as a deliberation. Is this propaganda, or is this because at heart he's like me? I mean, if you look at the way he's actually portrayed in the panels, he really has that sympathetic look. So to me, I can kind of see how he's the Superman at heart kind of thing.
True. Yeah, I mean, again, that was a very stark difference to like how the Bizarro Superman in the film was portrayed. Um, right after that, which is also kind of ironic that like we kind of broke off into this battle before we get to the funeral of Stalin, which I felt a little bit out of place, to be honest with you. Um, through the funeral of Stalin, we get another example of Pyotr trying to talk to Superman about how like everybody wants him to be the leader, and he again refuses to take the lead, and not wanting that responsibility. But as we go forward, we also see Lex Luthor kind of going crazy and upset that he felt humiliated, um, and asks Lois basically to take a back seat to their relationship because now he has to be completely and utterly devoted to the destruction of Superman. And as we go along, we see the actual interaction. One of the first interactions, I believe, between Superman and Lana, who is a childhood friend of his, which in the movie had a much bigger part. In this interaction is where we see Superman for the first time agree that he has to be the leader of this new world, and essentially when he sees Lana on the line for a to get some food. She's been waiting for hours, and then there's people on that line that have been waiting for weeks, and he realizes this is wrong, and no one should have to be living under these means. Um, as long as he's in power. And this is the moment that he decides to take on the challenge of leading the country and taking everyone out of poverty. So, as he said, Superman is here to rescue them all. How did you feel about these that being the motivation for him?
May I just interject one small point that
Of course, you can interject all you want.
when he's basically pseudo breaking up with Lois, um, one of the reasons that he claims that he's devoting his life to Superman is that the Bizarro Superman had the audacity to be the one to beat him at chess.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
think that also that not only adds to like Bizarro's intelligence and the fact that maybe he was trying to do the right thing, but
Yeah.
and it also calls back to like how the how different Lex really is uh, in this iteration and in the movie iteration.
Right.
I agree.
Um, so, any other points on that?
Nope, that's it. I just wanted that one little thing.
Okay, so fast forward, we're now kind of at the point where Lex Luthor is still every the ages have passed a little bit. Lex Luthor is beginning to bald, so to speak, beginning to look a little bit fatter, and you can see Superman has also aged. He has a little bit more of a presidential or militaristic uniform, and we get introduced to Brainiac. Um, the situation here is actually AJ. You have a little bit better understanding of Brainiac in this situation. So why don't you go ahead and explain to us what this whole interaction, which is I think different from how they did in the movie. Um, this interaction with Stalingrad in the glass and Brainiac.
So again, just I love Luther's snark in this. Like, apparently this guy's supposed to be smarter than me, and he can't even get the place right. Like
Yeah,
that was one thing I found really funny.
Mhm.
But he had a. It's very interesting. They actually switch up some lines here. Or actually, no. Does Batman also make the line later on? I don't remember. But basically, Luther, he's despite gathering as much knowledge as he does, he's continually testing Superman to see what his
right,
limits
right,
are. Like, it's not just, oh, so I've learned everything I can from this holiday. Great, I know everything. But, and it really also speaks to the point I mentioned earlier. What? Even the dude's clone can beat me? What the hell is this? So he's just, this is one of those moments where he's just, throughout the comic, he's constantly just testing Superman at his limits. That's what this is really supposed to symbolize.
exactly. So, um, and, that's an important interaction for sure. But this issue that we're in the second issue essentially. The second issue is now a little bit more predominantly about Batman and introduces Batman. So we fast forward a little bit to the Superman Museum, I believe, where we have the Rose Gallery that they have here. They talk about how every single country in the world has now come under the ideology of the Soviet Union, with the exception of the United States and Chile, which is interesting because isn't Chile also a communist country today in our real world?
I believe so. Yes. I think
Yeah, so
I'm
it's
pretty sure.
funny
Yeah.
that like they're not in this story. Anyway, so every single country in the world, with the exception of the U.S. and Chile, are now under Superman's watch, and here we now have Batman who wants to kind of, throw a wrench into Superman's plans and all that. So he's a little bit of a uh, revolutionary, you could say, and he plants a bomb in the museum. They don't show him as diabolical as he was in the movie. In the movie, he was a little bit more sadistic. I feel like he kind of gave everyone a chance to flee in the comic book, but he blows up the museum, and it seems like a bunch of other buildings created the commotion. And this is where we get introduced to Batman being this vigilante, uh, revolutionary vigilante, so to speak. So, um, and I thought that it was cool to see that happening because you see Piotr then come along to Superman and ask where was he when the country needed him, this, that, and the other, and you see Superman kind of chiseling out a statue of himself. It seems like with a sickle in hand. I thought that was really interesting. But he goes on to say that like while all that stuff was going on, he was doing other acts saving the country, and we even see him also interacting with Wonder Woman and stuff. I don't want to talk too much about the Batman scene since it wasn't too different from the movie itself.
No. Yeah.
Relatively simple there. But this interaction with Wonder Woman is kind of important. They're saving people off of a tanker, and we see Wonder Woman's view of America. Since she's representing this neutral state, she's saving people from both sides of the coin, and she says that America is disgusting. It's absolutely disgusting. It's 1978, and children are still sleeping in the streets over there. And at this point, Kennedy is the president, and she questions why he's still clinging on to this capitalist dogma, whereas communism is really the way to go. It seems like. Um,
Well, she does mention actually, and I think this was a bit of a nod to the film and the book. by
Hmm.
George Orwell, but she actually says it's 19. No, I'm sorry. Excuse me. You're right. It's 1978. I was going to make an
Hmm.
allusion to something else, but forget it. Wait, what is Kennedy's the president here? I thought it was. Huh. That's right. Because
Yeah, no,
when
she says
Nixon
she
got
mentions
assassinated,
Kennedy. I mean, again,
was
like I
there
guess
Kennedy in
different
this?
timelines and all that.
Yeah,
I
I think
guess
it was.
Kennedy didn't get
Yeah,
assassinated here.
yeah. Nixon got assassinated. I think in this one. Actually, that's something that happened earlier,
Huh?
and that they
I didn't
mentioned.
see that actually. I don't
Yeah,
remember seeing that.
they changed that timeline around. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, so we get a little bit of a kind of her world views on America, and we kind of get thrown back to Lex Luthor still trying to figure out how to defeat Superman, and we kind of see a glimpse of these red lamps, which we're gonna see a little bit later on. Um, the the interactions with with Superman and Wonder Woman are important here. As I alluded to earlier, this is this is kind of where we see Wonder Woman doing everything that she can to support Superman, but it seems like it's from a romantic point of view because, like I said, Superman states here on page 78, life. He's kind of reminiscing back to the early days of him being the Superman. And it says life was so simple in those days, deflecting meteorites, welding tectonic plates, and managing a global economy single-handedly. Every problem had a solution, sometimes even two solutions. Of course, a romance was suspected, but we both just laughed at the idea. Diana was more like one of the boys, and she had no use for men on her antiseptic island, or so it seemed in those faraway days. Poor Diana. I could monitor life on other worlds and watch electrons in their eternal orbit, but sometimes I was so blind. And this is, again, like I thought this was like an awesome way to show that there was an inkling of a romance, even though it never actually materialized. But it kind of perfectly, uh, shows or exemplifies that Wonder Woman or Diana wasn't doing all these things just to be, a hero, but she was doing it for Superman, it seems like. Did you guys get that feeling or no?
Yeah, I got that feeling for sure.
Um, So going on ahead, this is kind of where we start kind of getting to the climax of a impending battle between Batman and Superman,
Mhm.
and it's real funny because we see Batman in his cave, and it's not the Bat cave that you would assume or expect and stuff. It's very very run down. There's kind of ironically, actually, I never saw this. I didn't realize this first time around, but there's a he kind of has a messed up American flag in his cave. Interesting. You guys noticed that?
Yeah,
On
actually, I
page,
just noticed that also.
page
That's
81. I didn't realize that before.
81 hanging from the ceiling. This is actually one of the few things because going forward from this point on, like you said, the story doesn't really deviate a heck of a lot from the movie. This is where they don't really make any of the changes. I mean, the only small changes were this scene with Piotr and Batman, where they sort of hatch the plan that leads into the next scene. And just before that scene, I think the great scene with Lana, which kind of makes
Yeah.
it a more personal choice for Superman to take control. But
Well,
yeah,
that's actually it's funny because it's not such a small scene. If you realize, obviously, so
yeah,
Batman summons Piotr because he hears about around the rumbling around the he hears word that Piotr wants to meet with Batman, so he summons him to see what he wants to talk about. But let's not forget that Piotr is the person that killed Batman's parents. I don't think that Piotr knows this about Batman, or at least they don't really kind of allude to it necessarily. But Piotr comes to Batman and tells him that he's been in contact with the CIA and Lex Luthor, and they have a way, a surefire way to kill Superman and to
hmm
defeat him. And so they want to give Batman the tech in order to do so, which is going to end up being the red lamps that represent the Kryptonian weakness that he has in the regular Superman lore, and here it's the power of the red sun. Um, that's being emulated through these lamps that Lex is giving to Batman, which is, they didn't put that in the movie. I don't think we ever even questioned
No, they
how
did.
Batman.
They
They
did
Um,
put
did?
in the movie. That was in the movie. It's just that in the movie, I think they assumed that people understood that that was the weakness of Superman's.
No, no,
They
no.
didn't
I do.
really put
What I'm
that
saying
light.
is that like they didn't show that. I don't think in the movie they showed Lex Luthor giving Batman this
No,
technology,
you're right
No,
No,
right?
because
Batman knew him.
because he's not involved in
He
the
did not.
plot at all. Batman is completely running the plot in the comic
Right.
or in the movie. In the
In the
movie,
movie. In the movie, yes, yes. This Batman isn't as uh ingenious as he is in regular Batman lore or in the movie. I feel like, I guess. But I thought this was really interesting that like he would take a deal with the man who killed his parents when his whole motivation is essentially to, well, maybe not his whole motivation, but I guess has his motivation ever really been to kill his parents' killer?
Well, he
No,
did
no,
right?
say after
no,
Superman, he was next.
yeah, he
Yeah,
did.
he did state that. Yeah, he did state that.
but
Yeah.
not in
so
the
a
the
means
initial
to an
canon
end.
or the usual
Yeah.
canon. Hmm.
I'm
I
sorry,
think
what was that, Walter?
I think it was kind of a means to an end. The enemy of
Yeah,
my enemy is my friend type of thing. I
that's
think that
true.
at this point you start seeing how society is growing increasingly. They're not liking Supermanism, because you hear a lot of at this point there's some rumbling of the blandness of the idea, and this is where I think you're starting to see the skeletons of Superman's vision, because everybody has a job and everybody has a place in the world, but then you're forced into those places because a part of what he does is he takes those dissidents, those people that are against him, and he creates Superman robots, so to speak, where they're mindless
Right,
workers, and I think this is where you're starting to see the crack in his society, and you're seeing how more and more people are starting to get a little disillusioned with this perfect utopia that he believes he's created.
right. And it's funny because like going back to, since you mentioned the Animatrix, this is something also that like kind of harks back to the Matrix for me. If you guys remember in the what is it, Revolutions? The second movie, or is it Revisited? I don't
That's
remember.
Reloaded. Reloaded.
Reloaded, Matrix Reloaded. When Neo gets the architect says that like we created a Matrix and it was absolutely perfect
Hmm.
in every single way, and in that is that perfection drove the people mad.
Agent
Hmm.
Smith said that in the first one. Also,
Yeah,
he
he
actually
did.
They
says
said
that.
that in the first film.
Yep.
Yeah, he
Oh,
says the same thing. I think that the architect says it again, but he definitely says that in the first one um,
ugh,
as well. I saw it somewhat recently, actually, so that's how I remember it.
okay.
Pretty.
So yeah, so it's funny. Like I'd like to kind of study like, that philosophical point. Actually, I think there may be some truth to that because maybe that's the reason why there's always war and no peace. But anyway, um, Superman gets lured into a battle with Batman. Batman captures Wonder Woman and ties her up with her own lasso, forcing her under his control, and he forces her to get Superman there. He unveils to Superman that he has a bomb in his stomach, and just as always, explains to Superman that the strongest, most dangerous weapon is on Earth is the what's in his brain, the brain that's in the human mind. And he unveils the red heat lamps and proceeds to start destroying and beating the crap out of Superman, to the point that he can just throw him in a bunker to keep him under lock and key until Batman can you know rescue society and so on and so forth. Here's where it's a little bit different. Where in the movie, Wonder Woman, she takes it upon herself to break away from the chains and um, to save Superman, she breaks her own lasso in order to destroy the electric generator so that the lamps can turn off and Superman can come back to his all his glory. Whereas here in the comic book, he is the one that convinces Diana to break the lasso and save him, which she does. But as soon as she breaks the lasso, something very very different happens than the movie, where she kind of loses herself, loses her not just her soul, but also kind of like her mind a little bit. As soon as she breaks the lasso, she breaks the lasso, destroys the generator, but then she also kind of loses her being, which is kind of an important thing to note. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a few. Superman no longer being under the weakness of the red sun lamps, breaks free and threatens Batman with scrambling his brain and giving him a job at the as a bank teller, which is, I think, much more a little bit a step up from the market, which is what he was threatened with in the movie.
Yeah.
And in Batman, right before realizing that he said the reason that he swallowed the bomb is because he'd rather be a martyr than be one of Superman's ridiculous robots. And right before he presses the trigger and detonates himself into a billion gushing pieces, he tells Superman that Piotr was the one that betrayed him. Uh, Batman blows up, and there's a bunch of blood splatter on Superman, and we see kind of Superman's like face in awe. I guess maybe you've never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean this is mostly similar to the movie, so we don't have to get too much into the details. But the differences
right,
kind of are that you have the slightly different motivation for Wonder Woman, where here it's more Superman goading her into doing it. In the movie, it's more she does it more of her own accord to be heroic, which again kind of highlights the difference between Wonder Woman normally and in the movie and in the comic. And also, of course, you have the added layer where it's more of a plot that Piotr hatches with Batman, which does lead into the following scene after essentially again the same things occur with Superman or with Batman blowing up and Superwoman get or Wonder Woman getting old after she breaks the lasso.
right. I mean, again, one of the key differences for me is that like um, she's the one that like she chooses to listen to Superman and so on and so forth. But again, like when we fast forward and we see that she's being taken care of in a it seems like almost like a royal bed. She literally just like eats and sleeps and doesn't move. She's almost like catatonic, basically.
Hmm.
Uh, so very, very different because in the movie she was still Wonder Woman. She was just old.
And I
Yeah.
think this is one of the reasons why I think Piotr would have worked a little bit better because, you know, right afterwards we see that Piotr is turned into this mindless robot and stuff. And
Yes.
and we also see Superman kind of retreating and isolating himself into the Fortress of Solitude, you know. And I think this is where Piotr plays a bigger part also because it's the isolationism of Superman where it's like now he doesn't know who he can trust. He's already distancing himself from Wonder Woman. Piotr betrayed him. There was a plot to kill him, and meanwhile he's trying to do his best to create this perfect utopia for everybody,
Hmm.
and nobody seems to appreciate the fact that he's trying to do this.
Speaking
Right.
of appreciation, I wanted to highlight one specific thing. So,
Hmm.
right after the part where Wonder Woman breaks the lasso and Superman blows himself up, Wonder Woman goes to him like, "Hey, I think I really hurt myself and I messed up." And
Yeah.
Superman's reaction isn't even, "Hey, you know what? Yeah, you do look hurt. Are you all right?" It seems he is like so absorbed in himself. Like, I mean, I get that he's shocked by Piotr betraying him, but like, I just found that interesting that. And you saw it when he was making that statue to, well, who else, himself. But here
Yeah.
it also really highlights it. Like, everyone in his general vicinity, it's not so much that it doesn't feel like he genuinely cares for them. but they're more there to further his own ambitions. And this scene really staples that for me.
Yeah. Hmm.
Something that I wanted to point out is two of my favorite scenes. Well, two of my favorite parts, like dialogue in the scene, is I think it was stated in the movie too, but I'm just gonna tell you it. Quote, and I quote, "I can see your brain from here, Batman, and believe me, it's nothing to boast about." And I
Yeah.
just found that line really. I found that line. I don't know. There was something to it, but I think it was in the movie though, and I think that's why. That's one
It's
reason
in,
why it popped out to
it's
me.
in both. Hmm. It's in
Yeah,
both
yeah,
iterations of it.
It's pretty much word for word, right?
I
yeah.
think so. I think so.
And
Yeah, but going back to that, just like we did in when we reviewed the film, it was one of those things that like showed the stark difference between how Superman's brain works and how Batman's brain works. Whereas Superman sees things in a literal sense, as opposed to kind of discerning the deeper value of like what Batman was trying to say.
yeah.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
also my second thing that also really popped out to me was like it gave me the chills when Batman said it, but it's like, and I quote again, people I cared about. What you're going to feel for the next 10 minutes is nothing compared to what they went through. You power mad lunatic. And that really just, I don't know why that popped out to me, but it just seemed like Superman was more of the bad guy that than he is, and he is the bad guy in some, yeah. But it okay, yeah,
Right. So
Yep.
that pretty much concludes the second issue. Now we're in our third and final issue, and to start off the issue again, we see there's been a little bit of uh, a a fast forwarding of the time and stuff. Superman's just a little bit older looking. He's actually got a little bit of a receding hairline. By the way, I absolutely love Superman's suit in this in this comic. By the way, I think it's so like pretty boss. Anyway,
It's like a Kingdom Come Superman, a little bit like an
yeah,
older.
actually, yeah. Well, I mean, he kind of has that look also with the streaks of gray in his hair and
Hmm.
everything. So, in this timeline again, now we have a fully bald and aging Lex Luthor, who is also now the president of the United States, which is the sole country resisting the communist world essentially. And Lex Luthor has closed off all borders. He's creating his own American utopia to combat the communist utopia found in the rest of the world, but still with under the guise of trying to defeat Superman. Um, in here, this is where we kind of get like our first a introduction to the Phantom Zone. Now, being that AJ, you're a little bit more well versed in the Phantom Zone, I would like to see. Could you mind taking us through this whole section with the Phantom Zone and the Green Lantern Corps and all that? AJ.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah. So, sorry, I was looking at some of the comic panels here. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah. So I particularly found Hal Jordan's origin story very interesting. Like this was, and it's kind of it's sad. We could have at least gotten a little more of a snippet in the movie, but just like normally Green Lantern, yeah, he's cool, but like in this iteration, he's just a complete monster.
Right.
This dude, he like was able to survive how many months in Vietnam? No, not sorry, not months, 4 years. Basically under extenuating physical and psychological torture. And basically what this highlighted here was his qualifications for being the wielder of willpower. It's really good stuff.
Yeah, it's
Now,
pretty cool. Hmm.
Now from here we also see Superman in this is in his Fortress of Solitude talking to Brainiac, and Brainiac is really kind of giving his I guess his advice to Superman and what he should do and so on and so forth. Um, and we get to also see the Lantern Corps getting ready, which is I felt like this was a much bigger core than was shown in the movie.
Yeah.
But the
Hmm.
core goes off to fight Superman, and they start fighting, which I think I thought the battle in the comic was way better than in the movie. I also like the design of the Lantern Corps and Hal Jordan and so on and so forth. So I thought that was really cool. But from here, we also get a we get the women of Themyscira. I can never pronounce that right.
The mascara. Just think
Zero.
Themyscira,
mascara. The mascara.
the mascara,
The
the
mascara.
mascara. Okay. So anyway, they are they now go to fight Superman himself, which is also very different from the movie, right?
Yeah, in the movie, Wonder Woman was there as like it was her last like ditch effort to like, hey, you guys could be a much better force for the world working together than butting heads. But in this one, they were just like, yeah, you know what, we just don't like the Soviet Union anymore. Let's team up with the Americans.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, they
Um.
very differently. The motivations
Yeah.
Yeah,
are definitely very different.
and then
And
we go. Oh, sorry.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, it's all right. Go ahead.
And then we get into the final act where Superman's at his. He finally concedes to Brainiac's consent after Lex Luthor personally invades the Fortress of Solitude by
Yeah.
himself.
He uses the attack with the Green Lanterns as sort of a diversion to get in there.
Well, no, he actually gets in before that.
I thought it was during the battle.
No, he goes after.
Oh yeah. You're right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But so basically,
My bad.
so he goes to America. He's gonna end this once and for all. Brainiac finally is like, yeah, we're gonna get him, Superman. Let's go. And so he's fighting through the Rogues Gallery. Doomsday makes an appearance. You would have thought there
Yeah, I
would have
saw
been
that.
more there, but there wasn't. But then Lois comes out onto the scene. The fighting starts to come to a close. And she goes, I'm paraphrasing a lot here, but basically, hey,
For the sake of time,
what do I do?
paraphrase.
Are you really going to do this? And he's like, well, yeah, I kind of have to. Someone has to win this debate, you know? And she goes, well, Lex Luthor kind of wrote a letter for you. You know, you should probably read it before you go about doing it.
Yes.
And then he reads the letter, and oh my God, this letter. So the letter he writes to Superman is, why don't you just put the whole world in a bottle?
Yes. Why
And
was this
completely
removed from the
break
film?
him down. Like,
Why
I
did
mean,
they do this?
Brainiac said it before when Lex Luthor was originally gonna, when he broke into the Fortress of Solitude, he's like, Superman's like, dude, why'd you, because Brainiac shuts him down. Why did you do that? And Brainiac goes, well, if he'd said another 12 words, he would have been able to convince you to kill yourself. That statement is made manifest with this letter. My God.
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. This
And
this
then,
is something that I was really upset that they removed it. Like I said from the movie, because this is my absolute favorite moment in the entire comic. It shows you again, as you've said many times, AJ, like the level of intellect that Lex Luthor has in the canon is still way higher than Superman, who's also a genius level intellect. But um, it also illustrates that difference that we've been talking about for the entire time. How in the movie he's definitely more acting with a little bit more malice. In the comic, he's still got some malicious intent and some power hungry intent, but he's still human. And the way he breaks down in this moment is just so incredible.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so once he breaks down, he decides, you made your point, Lex. You know what? We're just going to go back to Russia. And Brainiac's like, dude, we're here. We should just do it. No, let's leave. I really think you should do this. No, come on, Brainiac, let's leave. Yeah, okay, this is unacceptable. And blasts him. Like, this completely blasts him. And, he, in the movie, he goes on the tangent. Bro, you really thought you could reprogram me? Get on my level. And after a little bit of help from Lex Luthor, they basically beat Brainiac. And then, just like in the movie also, his black hole engines start to do a countdown for self-destruct. Superman goes, well, I gotta be me. Let's take this one to the stars. What is different from the movie, however, is that Superman realizes that Lex had this all planned out. And he basically makes this comment at the not the very end, but at the end of this particular story. He just says, well played, old friend. And he launches the Brainiac ship into oblivion.
Right, which is again, this is where I say that this is just another example of how there was a more personal back and forth between Lex and Superman than in the film. And yeah, this, we see the Brainiac explosion and so on and so forth, and right after Superman says, "Well played, old friend," we get brought back to Lex Luthor, where he's kind of reminiscing. He says, "Superman gone, Brainiac gone, the world ready to embrace Lutherism even more readily than ever before. One could almost be forgiven for thinking that this had all been worked out to the 10th decimal point 40 years ago, eh?" And then he says, "Checkmate, Superman." Now, my question for you guys is this: was Lex Luthor completely self serving, or was he doing this for the betterment of mankind? Here, I feel like he's self serving because in him saying that the world is ready to embrace Lutheranism, this is him accomplishing his goal of world domination, isn't it?
Yeah, that, and well, he finally beat Superman. That's been like his goal for the past 40 to 50 years. Yeah, 40 years.
Right.
So in the movie, he has more humanitarian goals.
Yes, exactly.
In this one, it's like, well, Luther's the way, folks. Let's get on with it.
I think in the movie he started out much like the one in the comic, and then he veered off.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think the movie kind of showed that because the entire movie he was playing a chess game, so it was almost as if the entire movie for him was the chess game. But I think somewhere in the middle, his motivations changed. It swerved more toward a more humanitarian view, whereas in the comic book, he still kind of stayed the same all the way down the line.
Yeah.
Now, here's where we get to the ending that we've been alluding to that's very, very different, or rather, it's like an additional ending to the film itself, because we get like a little bit of a fast track forward to the future of society, where Luther has lived now for, I have no idea for how long actually, but it seems well into the fourth millennia. Right before he passes, thousands of years. So every single bad thing has been cured. There's no AIDS, there's no cancer, there's no diabetes, blindness, and every single form of illness has been eradicated. The entire solar system has been populated, and there are there's eons and eons of generations stemming from Lex Luthor, which brings us to a very interesting future. Um, and I'm gonna read a little bit of that future, well, towards the ending of this on page 144. Um, mankind has, and I'm reading from the middle. Mankind has evolved to become the most advanced species in the known universe, inspired and led by a billion years of Luther lineage, a billion years. Lena Luthor, the artist, Lombard Luthor, the Imagineer, Lord Luth, 145, the mathematician, Jordan Luth, 1938, pioneering necronaut, and first man to set foot in the afterlife. Whoa, I kind of want to see like a comic on that.
I missed,
Alex L, Jordan L. Oh, sorry, yeah.
I missed that one.
I remember that. That was nuts.
Now here's where it starts to get interesting because now we see as we see we're seeing the progression of like surnames. Before it was just Leonard Luther, then it went to Luth with a number attached to the end of it, and now we're going into Alex L, the L denoting Luther, right? Um, so we have Alex L, Jordan L, Lana L, and of course Lex Luthor's great grandson to the power 50, a young man called Jor L, whose IQ exceeded that of even his beloved ancestor. But he's been
Yo.
acting strange lately, working too hard and telling the world that our bright red sun that has dimmed my powers and aged my mind is in danger of consuming us. Could he be right? I wonder. Or is this to be the first time in countless years that a Luther had made a mistake? And this is, of course, Superman narrating. And we see essentially kind of like the same Superman origins that we're used to. We see Jor-El and his wife arguing about, the cataclysmic event of the red sun consuming their planet or their planet being destroyed or whatnot. In this case, it's the red sun consuming the planet. And in an effort to stop this from happening, Jor-El sent his son Kal-El, the L again denoting the descendancy of Luther. I guess he's like Lex Luthor's grandson to the power of 51, I guess. I don't know. Um, Jor-El sent his son Kal-El into the past to stop this from happening. And when he lands in Russia, giving us a time travel into the past of Russia. He lands in Russia, and essentially, it's kind of like this is the origin of this whole Russian Superman um, story. So, what did you guys think of that, like time travel ending?
The time travel bit was a surprise, to be sure. But really, I think the better part of this ending was the progression of the names from Luther, Luth 138 to
Yeah,
L.
that was cool.
That was
I
actually
like that.
cool. The time travel itself, I was all right with it, but as we've been, because we talk outside of the podcast, we were talking about it a little bit before. The time travel kind of, I don't want to say it cheapens it, but like for it to be an infinite loop, it's like, oh wow, okay.
I
Well,
think this comic book should have ended a couple of pages earlier. I think it could have ended
interesting.
on the dialogue with Superman narrating and him walking away after he saw Lois. I'm not a fan of the way this thing ended. I think it was really jarring, especially after what we had seen everything, and it didn't work for me.
Per-
oh,
no, go on, Eli. I'm sorry.
two things. I felt like the ending was completely random. Like it just didn't fit in with the rest of the story. It wasn't. I mean, I guess it kind of did, but like it didn't. It felt out of place.
Here's what I like about it. What I like about it is that Luthor, his whole fixation is on Superman. But the tragedy of it all is really fighting with himself, or rather his own intellectual genius. This is honestly a self-contained Luthor story, because basically what you have happening here is everyone's fixating on the fact that Superman is an alien. He is so different from us. But what does he end up being? He ends up being a human from the future. And for
Right,
me,
I
it's
think that's
kind
the
of
point.
ironic that Luthor has this whole vendetta against Superman, but he ends up being related to Superman.
But also my second thing is that I felt like the Brainiac fight happened way too quick.
Yeah.
It was rushed. It felt rushed. It didn't.
I felt like there could have been. Yeah, I agree with you, Eli. I felt like there could have been a little bit more development of the Brainiac kind of storyline and stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Personally, I actually thought like just to kind of harp on like what you said, Walter. Like it could have ended a couple pages earlier. I think it could have ended right at the end of the explanation of all the descendancy, like all the way
Yep.
until it gets to like Jor El, because then that would
Absolutely.
have left it open ended for us to be like, wow, like so like Kal El. The reason he's named Kal El is because he's a descendant of Lex Luthor, and then we would have just been left to wonder if like the Kal-El that we know is from some parallel universe or from some other version of Earth in some other distant planet. It would have been better to leave it open without showing the time travel piece.
That's actually
Well,
a cool idea.
I see. I actually again, I have to disagree a little bit because I thought it was interesting because it showed even further and more intimately what all great sort of comic heroes and villains have in their origin story is that they sort of create each other. This is a way of making that really literal. Like he
Yeah,
really
that's
like literally
that
creates Superman.
Well, you
And
don't take away from that if
but
you
wait,
take away
wait.
the time travel. You still have that.
But
If
I
they
think the
show
time
the
travel. Well, hold on. I'm not finished. The time travel
okay,
thing, I think, is intended to show what this comic is trying to also say is that no matter what you do to try to strive towards this perfect society, you're going to make huge mistakes in the striving, and there's a cycle to it. That's the cycle of him going back in time and us actually witnessing that as opposed to it being something that is just hinted at in the ending, which is why I think those extra pages actually matter and make the ending in a way. Yeah, it's a little bit out there, but it's more impactful and it's more in the tone of where the comic is, in my opinion.
well, again, the reason that I find it jarring is because you essentially it's you can't have the way they did the time travel to kind of explain how Superman even ended in Russia in the first place, ended it kind of breaks the story because then which one came first, right? Lex have become president and have done all of this stuff if it wasn't for the battle that he had with Superman? And if he wouldn't have done all that, then how could Superman have been created in this future if Lex didn't fight
Right.
him in the first
But
place?
that's what I'm saying. Like this makes it so that they absolutely created each other. There's no disconnect at all because they're literally stuck in a loop together. They absolutely create each other. And it
Yeah, but
doesn't
again,
matter who creates but it doesn't matter who creates each other first. I think that's more to the point.
no, it's not.
Nobody
That's
creates
not
each
what I'm
other first.
saying. What I'm saying is that would Superman have been created if Lex didn't fight Superman?
You
See what I'm saying?
you get
Yes.
you
Yes,
get
that's my point. Yes.
groundhog
No matter
type.
what, still it still happens.
You get
I don't
like
know, man.
groundhog
I don't think
situation,
so.
where it's like you're just looping back and forth, you're basically telling the same story over and over again, and
My issue with the
I
time travel is the whole like chicken and egg thing. Which one came first? Because I don't see Superman being created as a descendant of Lex Luthor if Luthor didn't have the problem of Superman in his life to then become president and create all this stuff. Like that's what I'm trying to say.
yeah, no, it's
Like
the Terminator paradox, but I'm kind of
that's
over it.
it's the paradox. It's the time traveler's paradox.
yeah.
The grandfather paradox is the question. That's what the actual technical term is.
That's always
You
a
know what I
problem
mean?
in movies, though. Like, no matter what movie you could pick, whether it's an Endgame or Terminator, like I think it's hard to pick at a time travel element because they just do it however they want in different mediums. But I
Yeah.
mean, that's not that big of a point, really.
Yeah.
I don't know. For me, it's a huge point.
I think it just becomes a very jarring way to end a comic that for
Yeah.
part I was really, really into. And then all of a sudden they dropped this, and it's like, where did that come from? You know,
Yeah,
it was
Yeah.
really,
yeah.
really
I
nothing
did
that
feel like it
paid
was
off
unnecessary.
at the very end. You know,
Yeah. All right. So comic book ratings. Once again, our rating system goes 1 through 5. Um, you should consider reading it if you're a fan, but you wouldn't be hurt.
Wait.
Your comic book knowledge would not be hurt if you missed out on it completely. 6 through 10 is definitely borrow it, consider buying it and adding it to your collection. If you are a fan at all, you should definitely be picking this up, at least reading it through the online apps that are available, or borrowing it from somebody, or adding it, or picking it up in physical form for yourself. So again, um,
Okay.
uh, who wants to go first?
I guess I will. I'm gonna
Oh,
give.
wait, hold on. Let's also add. I apologize. Let's also add, since we do have the book and movie comparison, which is your personal favorite and why, the book or the movie?
So I'm gonna go with the book for one. My rating is going to be. I'm gonna give this an 8.9, and the reason why I prefer this over the book is I really just like the ending. I like the irony of it, and it's kind of, for me, this is precisely the kind of idiot box that Lex Luthor would find himself in, despite how smart he is. Like, no, what I really like about it is no matter how smart Lex Luthor gets, he will always have to abide by like the laws of the universe in some
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. And for me, it's basically just it's the definition of insanity. What the ending is, like,
Hmm.
you're doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. That's what I really liked about the ending. And then, of course, you have the whole Piotr arc. So, yeah, that's really why I really prefer the comic over the movie. There was just so much in the comic that made it enriching that the movie, while good, for me, didn't do as well.
I'm gonna go next, just as a little bit. I'm gonna be quick. I would rate this. You guys know me, so
It's going to be a
yeah.
It's
7.
a 0.
Oh god.
Uh,
Remember, 1 through 5 means banish it, or possibly consider, like, only if you're the biggest diehard should you even consider reading it. But for the most part, definitely just like don't even think about this book. That's 1 through 5.
3.5 for the
Oh,
movie.
Jesus Christ.
Oh
Three.
shoot!
No. For the movie, it's gonna be a 2.5, and for the book, it's gonna be a 3.5.
But the movie, you rated it higher like last
What,
time.
what happened there?
What?
It wasn't that rating.
You rated the movie like a 7.
I know, but then I realized that it was missing a few things.
All right. Well, look. Choose the movie or the comic. Which one? It seems like the comic is better for you, but just rate the comic book.
Okay, I'm just gonna rate the comic book 3.5. No, 3.3. Okay,
Okay.
5. It doesn't matter. But anyway, I liked it only because of the small details, but like the end just completely ruined everything for me. Like, I'm talking everything.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't really like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll go with my rating next. So between the two, I think most can tell that I like the comic a little bit better than the movie. I think I rated the movie around a 7.5, if I remember, a 7 or a 7.5. I think the comic is a solid 8. I think it does everything in a much more interesting way. I think it is very much trying to create a larger context for all of Superman and Lex Luthor and Wonder
Hmm.
Woman's actions within the story. Even though they're huge in the movie as well, I think that again everything is very very causal. Like one moment leads to the next a little bit more so, and it's more reactionary. Even though yeah they're playing chess, and that's something that they note a lot in the comic. Um, there's a little bit more of like AJ said, they're being pushed by the river of time, no matter what they do, and by the river of reality. But I think, yeah, for me, the comic was a little more interesting. The way that certain characters' backstories was better. Piotr was a more interesting character to introduce into the machinations of the comic, and to have him execute Stalin was better as opposed to Superman doing it. Wonder Woman
Hmm.
was kind of the same in both, but Batman was also more interesting in the comic to me. So overall, and I like the ending. Like, I think the ending was interesting. I don't think it was perfect, but I think I disagree with most in that I think the ending was effective. So for me, it was an eight, I would say, and I liked it better than the movie.
I
Walt?
I
Oh,
yeah, I just want to fix my thing because it seems I misunderstood a little bit. I rated it
Mhm.
out of 5. So, actually, I want to
what's that?
change that. It
Yeah,
was
no, no,
my
no,
I love Eli. I
no,
love
no.
how
I
you
understand
always
what happened. No, I
sometimes
understand
it's
what
like
happened.
out of Dragon Balls, sometimes it's out of pizza slices, how we used to do it. Sometimes it's out of 5, sometimes it's out of 10.
um.
All right.
I'm
So
gonna go with okay. For the movie, a 3.5. No, a 5. And for the comic book, a 7.5. Now we can move on. Dad, Walt.
Okay.
Okay.
Walt.
Yes, sir. When I read this, there's for me three seminal Superman stories. It's this one, it's All Star Superman, and it's The Man That Has Everything. I believe that's the title. And I'm always those are my three favorite Superman story runs and stuff. Um, I've always considered Red Sun to be an essential reading um, in Superman just because of the nature of how different this story is. So being that it's an essential reading for me, I have to rate it at least a 9. You know, I
Wow. Okay.
and the only reason I don't rate it a little bit higher is because I'm not a fan of that ending. That ending for me just kind of it throws the whole story off for me. You know what I'm saying? Um,
Hmm.
where I vacillate a little bit is in comparing it to the film because there are some things that the comic does really, really well. The Piotr storyline being one of them. I think that's something that when they adapted it to the animated film, they kind of missed the boat on that one. But then again, I look at the Lana storyline within the animated film, and for that movie, it makes a ton of sense, and it really gives you
Hmm.
a motivation as to why Superman turns on Stalin in that movie.
mhm.
So I'm kind of torn between the two right now, just because I love the comic book. I would lean more toward the Red Sun comic book than the film, but I like them on any day. I can go back and forth and tell you this was really good on the animated film, this was really good on the comic. So but I think that if you're a Superman fan, this is essential reading.
All right.
Mhm.
Um, Personally, this is a little bit hard for me, right? Because again, I'm not like a super DC guy. Definitely not at all a general fan of Superman. It's funny because when I was a kid, I was all about Superman. But yeah, as far as the movie and the comic goes, I feel like they're almost two completely different stories. Even though like a lot of the stuff is the 90% of the stuff is the same, the changes that they made to Superman's character and to not having Piotr and even a few small changes with Batman and Wonder Woman, I felt like that had such a drastic difference in the characters themselves, as well as the fact that like we didn't have the ending that we have in the comic book. It's almost like they're two different stories, and there's plenty in the movie that I like better than the comic, and then plenty in the comic that I like better than the movie. So it's hard for me to pick one or the other. I guess ultimately it's a matter of which story was told a little bit more cohesively. And while I like more of the comic book stories, the comic book elements better as far as like the narration from Superman's point of view and so on and so forth. I found that the movie did a lot of things, in my opinion, better. I like Lex Luthor and hmm, see, this is hard. I don't want to say that I like Lex Luthor better in the movie than the comic because there's parts in the comic that he was really cool, but then I don't know. I
Yeah.
can't even
Oh,
like
yeah.
can't even like formulate my thoughts right now because it's so opposite. But I guess like a small edge goes to the comic for me over the movie. Um, the comic I would give it a 6.5 out of 7, only because um the I felt like there was stuff missing in the comic book that they put in the movie that if I never saw the movie would have been hard for me to kind of get to, like the changes, or rather kind of like some of the backstory behind Superman's actual origins not being in the comic at all, except for the very end on how he landed in Russia.
Hmm.
um I felt like Lex Luthor wasn't as fleshed out as he was in the movie, in my opinion, because they didn't really show too much of his relationship with Lois as much as they did in the movie.
I
And I felt those
disagree with that. I think they showed more of it because they talk about how they never see each other. They talk about like what Lois does with her time. She talks about it with other characters in the comic, and she doesn't do that in the movie. That I disagree with. I think it's much more fleshed out
yeah.
in the comic.
I have to.
No, see, the thing is, like, the thing that I see in the comic from Lex Luthor's point of view
Hmm.
is just 100% his devotion to defeating Superman, pretty much. Whereas
Mm.
in the comic, we see him like he does have they show him struggling between Superman and Lois a little bit more. We see Lois's point of view in the comic more, but we don't see Lex and Lois interacting as much in the comic. Whereas in the movie, they did.
But that's actually kind of the point. Like, sure, they are married, but it's like that's just who Lex is. His focus is never on what he views as the periphery. Marriage, while we would consider that as being one of those things that's front and center, to someone like him, that's really just the periphery.
I
And,
understand, but see, that's what I'm saying. Like in the comic, it's just one singular thing that's going on with Lex. It's not as diverse as he was shown in the movie. That's what I'm trying to say. Like they didn't show,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
it's almost like he had his relationship and he had everything else that he wanted to do, but in the comic book, all that stuff was cast aside very quickly, very
Hmm.
haphazardly,
Hmm.
just for his goal of defeating Superman, and we only saw the one aspect. And like I said, like again, these are just my opinions where I felt like some of the things that they did with the character in the movie, I felt like were a little bit better than in the book, even though the book may have told a better overall story. But again, the ultimate thing for me with the book is I can't agree with the ending where you don't answer the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, which came first, Superman or Lex. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
you don't that doesn't get answered, and if it's not answered, it kind of breaks the story for me. So
All right. All right. So that's everyone's opinions on this. I think for the most part, everyone enjoyed the comic a little bit more than the film, to varying degrees. Although, Wolfie, you definitely made the point that there were some things that were done better in the comic, some that were done better in the movie. I think the balance between our different reviews definitely lies in who thought more was done better in the comic versus the movie. Um, but again, there's a lot of differences. We encourage everyone who hasn't seen either the movie or read the comic to go back and take a look at both of them. And well, we're at the end of the podcast, but if you haven't seen the movie, maybe you can go and take a listen to that, and then come back and visit this a little bit more. But either way, I think it was a good piece of media for the most part, and we had a
for
great
sure,
conversation about it. So once again, as always, I just want to say to everyone that's listening to us, we want to thank you for joining us, not only for this podcast, for all our other podcasts, for our Superman Red Sun film review, and again, we've been really appreciating some of your feedback. We want to thank the artists of the comic Axeman for sending us that. And again, if anybody has
artists and the writers,
the artists and the writer, excuse me, the creators of the comic, I should say, for sending us that and for letting us take a look at it and review it on our show. And again, we encourage all of you to send us some more of your comic books, short films, anything that you want to send us, really, for us to take a look at it. If you want us to review it, we can give each other some more exposure in that way, which is always something that we love. We love working with all of the other geeks out there to build the geek community. That said, again, thanks very much. Thank you for joining us for our Red Sun Superman comic book episode. And as always, all of you out there in internet land, thank you very much. Stay geeky, my friends.
Except to PewDiePie.
Don't.
Except to PewDiePie.